Welcome back to Sip and Talk, everyone. Ooh. I'm still kind of reeling from all the messages we got after that last episode on martial law.
Yeah, did you see that too?
Like, who knew that topic would hit such a nerve?
I think we might have accidentally started a few conspiracy theories out there.
Oops.
Maybe.
Well, hey, that's what happens when you sip and talk, right? Sometimes things get
a little intense.
Yeah. Speaking of intense, today's deep dive is taking us somewhere where the lines between, like, reality and satire get super blurry.
You're talking about China, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because their reaction to South Korea's whole martial law thing was...
It was wild.
Was something else.
Remember when President Yoon Suk-yeol suddenly declared martial law back on December 3rd?
Oh, yeah. The whole world was like, wait, what?
Yeah, and then China's reaction.
I know.
They were practically like rolling on the floor laughing.
It was like they were watching a comedy show unfold in real time.
Yeah, we found this article from Voice of America.
Oh, yeah.
And the title is, South Korean Martial Law Sparks Ridicule and Mockery Among Chinese Netizens.
Some of those comments are priceless.
Like gold.
Yeah.
One person wrote, "Oh my God, witnessing history. Is the Civil War beginning?"
Oh my gosh.
Another one said, "South Korean politicians are too unserious, lol."
It's like they just couldn't believe how poorly it was all handled.
It took a big joke.
I know.
And get this, some bloggers were comparing it to that movie Soul Spring.
Oh, yeah?
Which is about a military coup in South Korea back in 1979.
The irony is thick.
So thick.
Right.
It's like they're saying, hey, South Korea, if you're going to do martial law, at least learn from the pros.
Yeah, exactly.
But all jokes aside,
yeah,
this whole thing really got us thinking.
It did.
Why were the Chinese people so quick to mock South Korea?
Right.
Could it be that they're living under a form of control that's so pervasive they don't even recognize it anymore?
That's where things get really interesting.
Right.
You know, China officially calls its political system a people's democratic dictatorship.
It's like even the name sounds like a contradiction.
Right.
A total oxymoron.
So we did a bunch of research trying to figure out if China is, in essence, already living under martial law, but just doesn't realize it.
And what did you find? Spill the tea.
Okay, so there are two main viewpoints here. The pro-China side argues that their system is incredibly effective. Like, they point to China's rapid economic growth and social stability and high levels of public support for the government as proof that their system works.
Okay, that's a fair point. They've definitely made some impressive strides economically.
Right.
But I'm guessing the other side of the argument isn't so rosy?
Not exactly. The critical view argues that this stability comes at a steep price, individual freedom. They highlight these restrictive laws like the national security law and the anti-espionage law, which basically make it illegal to criticize the government.
Yeah, I read about those laws.
Yeah.
It's wild. Imagine not being able to freely express your opinion about your own government.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of censorship. The government controls the media and the internet with an iron fist, blocking anything they deem harmful or subversive.
So it's like everyone on the outside is watching this whole South Korea martial law drama unfold.
Right.
But China's citizens might be living under an even stricter form of control without even realizing it.
It makes you wonder, what does it actually mean to live under martial law?
Yeah.
Is it about tanks in the streets?
Or is it something way more insidious?
Yeah, something invisible.
Ooh, I like that, invisible martial law. It sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel.
Well, maybe it's not as far-fetched as you think.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. Tell me more.
Let's talk about technology. China has the most sophisticated digital surveillance system in the world. Cameras everywhere, facial recognition software, a social credit system that tracks your behavior, and AI-powered algorithms that can predict your every move.
Okay, that's just creepy.
Yeah.
I always knew China had a lot of surveillance, but this is next level. It's like living in a panopticon, constantly being watched and judged.
And it's not just the tech itself. It's the fact that the Chinese government has near total control over the flow of information. Like, think about their ranking on the World Press Freedom Index.
Ugh, gotta be bad.
Consistently at the very bottom.
If.
Which puts them on par with countries that are actually under martial law.
That's a good point. If you can control the narrative, you can control the people.
Exactly.
And when you combine that with advanced technology and a culture of fear, well, you've got a recipe for some pretty effective invisible martial law.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's powerful. It's a form of control that doesn't rely on brute force, but on manipulating people's perceptions and their behavior.
It makes you wonder, are we seeing similar trends emerging in other parts of the world?
That is a really good question, and one we should definitely explore more.
Yes, after the break. Stay tuned, Sip and Talkers, because things are about to get really interesting. I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip and Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it. So we were talking about this invisible martial law thing before and how technology is like a huge part of it.
Yeah, it's kind of freaky to think about China using all that tech to control everything. But you know what? I bet some people listening are like, okay, but I don't live in China, so why should I care?
That's a really good point. And it's easy to think of this as just a China problem, you know?
Yeah.
Something happening over there that doesn't really affect us.
Right.
But actually, a lot of these trends we're seeing in China, like with technology and control, are starting to show up in other parts of the world, too.
Really? Like, what kind of stuff are you seeing in other countries that's similar to what's going on in China?
Well, think about all the surveillance technology that's popping up even here in the West.
Oh, yeah?
Like facial recognition software. It's being used by more and more police departments, and we're seeing more algorithms used to predict crime and track our movements and even influence our opinions online.
It's true. I've seen those headlines. It's kind of scary to think about. Like 1 minute you're just scrolling through social media and the next minute you're getting targeted ads based on some random conversation you had with your friend. It's like our privacy is disappearing right in front of our eyes.
Exactly. And it's not just about surveillance either. Think about how polarized online discussions have become.
Oh, don't even get me started.
And the rise of cancel culture and how it's getting harder and harder to just have an open and honest conversation without being afraid of getting shut down or like ostracized.
Yeah, it's like everyone's walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing.
It is.
You know, when we were prepping for this episode, I saw some comments on our last podcast about martial law.
Oh, really?
And people were accusing us of like fear-mongering. They were all, this is just a slippery slope fallacy. It's not going to happen here. But honestly, after doing all this research, I'm not so sure anymore.
I think it's really important to be aware of how control can manifest.
Yeah.
Even in subtle ways.
So like, what are some red flags we should be looking out for? How can we tell if our own country is heading down this invisible martial law path?
Well, one big sign is if there's less and less room for dissent. When governments or powerful institutions can't handle any criticism, and they start labeling any opposing viewpoint as dangerous or unpatriotic.
That's a good point. If you can't even criticize the people in power, how can you hold them accountable?
Exactly. And then on the technology side, we need to be careful about any technologies that give governments and corporations too much power over our lives.
Like what specifically?
Well, mass surveillance programs, especially the ones that use facial recognition or other biometric data, those have the potential to be super invasive.
Right.
And don't forget about the use of AI to manipulate information, like to create deepfakes and spread propaganda and just sow discord.
So what happens if we start seeing these red flags popping up in our own countries? Like, what can we actually do about it? It's not like we can just unplug from the internet and live off the grid.
You're right. It's not about running away. It's about being informed and engaged and proactive.
Okay, so what does that look like?
We need to support organizations that are fighting for digital privacy and free speech. We need to be really careful about the information we consume. Like, fact check everything and call out misinformation and propaganda whenever we see it.
And I guess most importantly, we need to have these conversations.
Yes.
To talk about these issues openly and honestly, even when it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Silence is not our friend. The more we talk about these things, the more we can raise awareness and push back against these trends.
You know, it's funny. Because in a way, this whole thing with China laughing at South Korea's martial law situation, it's almost like a wake-up call for the rest of the world.
How so?
Like they're holding up a mirror and saying, look how ridiculous you look when you try to control everything. Get it together.
That's a really good point. And, you know, it just goes to show that even in the most tightly controlled societies, there's always this desire for freedom, a desire to challenge those in power.
But how do we make sure that desire doesn't get snuffed out?
We need to protect it and amplify it.
How?
By being vigilant and courageous and willing to stand up for what we believe in. We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to save us.
Those are some powerful words. So what you're saying is that there's still hope. That even with this whole invisible martial law thing, we can still fight back. We can still choose freedom.
I really believe that. But it takes all of us working together.
That's inspiring. So, Sip and Talkers, we've covered some pretty heavy stuff today. If people don't even realize they're living under some form of control, does it even matter? And what happens when we start accepting stability above all else?
Such important question.
I know, right? And there are no easy answers?
Nope. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the first step towards freedom is asking these tough questions and challenging our assumptions and refusing to settle for a world where control is the only thing that matters.
Love that.
So we've been talking about this idea of invisible martial law and how it might be playing out in China and even in other parts of the world.
And we've touched on some pretty unsettling trends like mass surveillance, the erosion of privacy, and that shrinking space for dissent.
It's a lot to process.
It is. My head is spinning. But you left us with a really thought-provoking question before the break. You asked if it even matters if people are unaware they're living under a form of control.
Right. It's like it goes to the heart of what we've been discussing. If people have adapted to a restricted environment and they just don't see it as oppressive, does that make it any less controlling?
It's a tough one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, if people are happy, if they feel safe, does it really matter if they're giving up certain freedoms? But then again, is that just complacency? Are they just frogs in a pot of slowly boiling water, you know?
That's the danger, right? When that control becomes so normalized, so invisible, people lose the ability to even imagine a different way of life.
Right, they might not even realize what they're missing.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Like, if people don't understand what it means to actually live in a free society, they might not even recognize it when their freedoms are being taken away.
And that brings us to that second part of the question. What are the long-term consequences of accepting stability above all else?
Right, it's like trading freedom for security. But is that a trade-off we're willing to make?
It's a slippery slope, right? When a society prioritizes stability above everything else, it can lead to a stifling of creativity, innovation, critical thinking. It can create a culture of fear where people are afraid to speak out, afraid to challenge the status quo.
And that's when things can get really dangerous. When people are afraid to speak their minds, question authority, challenge the narrative, that's how authoritarianism takes root. That's how democracies crumble.
Exactly. And it's not just about political freedom either. When you create a society where everyone is expected to conform, where individuality is suppressed, it can have such a devastating impact on people's mental health, their well-being, their overall happiness.
Wow. So this whole invisible martial law thing, it's not just some abstract concept.
It's not.
It has real consequences for individuals, for society as a whole.
Absolutely. And it's something we need to be aware of and resist, both individually and collectively.
So what can we do? How do we fight back against this invisible martial law? Do we all need to become, like, activists and hackers?
I think it starts with awareness, like we've been talking about. We need to educate ourselves about the ways in which control can operate in our societies. And we need to be willing to speak out against injustice, even when it's uncomfortable.
So important. We can't just, like, sit back and hope someone else will fight our battles for us. We have to be engaged citizens, hold our leaders accountable, defend our freedoms.
Exactly. And it's not just about, like, grand gestures either. Small acts of resistance can be incredibly powerful. Choosing to support independent media, having these open and honest conversations with our friends and family, challenging misinformation and propaganda when we see it. These things might seem small, but they can really make a difference.
It's like planting these little seeds of resistance, spreading awareness, creating a ripple effect.
Exactly. And, even in the face of overwhelming power, there's always strength in numbers. When people come together, when they refuse to be silenced, they can create real change.
I love that. So, Sip and Talkers, we've covered a lot of ground today. From the irony of China mocking South Korea's martial law blunder to the chilling reality of invisible martial law and how it's impacting the world.
It's been quite the journey.
It has.
Yeah.
But we want to leave you with a sense of hope and empowerment. We might not be able to single-handedly dismantle these systems of control that are popping up around the world, but we can resist.
We can choose to stay informed, speak out, connect with others who share our values, and just keep fighting for a world where freedom and individual liberties aren't just some abstract ideals, but actual lived realities.
Beautifully said. All right, Sip and Talkers, that's a wrap on this deep dive into invisible martial law. We hope it was thought-provoking, maybe even a little inspiring. Keep those conversations flowing, and as always, don't forget to keep sipping and talking.
Cheers to that.